morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience and grace as we work out some tech. We are so thrilled to welcome you to this two-part webinar, Breathing for Justice. This has been a work in progress, but we are so excited about the lineup we have and the conversations we'll be having today. We'll be talking about breath, disability, chronic illness, long COVID, healthcare, education, and so much more. My name is Sarah. I am a Korean American person with shoulder-length black hair that is curled. I have on pink glasses and a light blue and white striped shirt. Also have shoulder-length black hair that is curled. I will be a moderator for the second panel in the afternoon and working with Bree Noonan as an access doula. Before we get started, we have a couple of access notes and general housekeeping notes to orient us all. First of all, we thank Illinois Humanities and the American Association of People with Disabilities for sponsoring this event. Thank you to UIC's Dr. Jenny Breyer and team at Listening for the Long Haul and Strategies for High Impact and Long COVID Justice. We also want to give a shout out to Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL translation services today. Most of us today on the panels are spoonies, chronically ill, and disabled, and working on CRIP time. Some of us need more time, while others need less, and some are running on limited energy and capacity. We invite you to take care of yourselves throughout the sessions in whatever ways are most comfortable for you. Because access is ongoing and constantly being negotiated, we have also built into the sessions several 7-minute access breaks. We hope by building these into the sessions, we are able to practice collective care for the panelists and those of you in attendance today. Furthermore, we have a fantastic access doula today with us, Bree Noonan. If you have any access needs or questions that need attention, please send them a message in the chat, and we will do our best to support you. Finally, a note on language and pace as it relates to the specific needs that emerge among the long hauler community and are relevant for our sessions today. As a result of long COVID, language and memory can be increasingly difficult and frustrating. For long haulers, this can manifest in challenges speaking and memory recall. These experiences can be shame-inducing and debilitating for folks who are navigating new baselines of embodiment and learning to stop, rest, and pace. These experiences are also a part of CRIP time, and so riffing off of disability studies scholar Allison Kafer, we invite you today to reflect on the ways long haulers are bending the clock to meet their diverse and emergent access needs.
Wow, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone here. This is Jackie Luciano speaking, and I'd just like to share that it's so incredibly challenging to organize and participate in an event like this while living with long COVID and non-apparent disabilities. Thank you all for understanding that I'll be having my camera off today for accessibility needs, as I am currently in a relapse state due to long COVID and ME. My pronouns are she, her, and my image shows that I am a middle-aged Filipina American woman with shoulder-length wavy dark brown hair, brown eyes, a black blouse, and there's a bright beige wall. Sarah and I met while collaborating on UIC's Dr. Jennifer Breyer and Strategies for High Impact Long COVID Justice Project, Listening for the Long Haul, which you'll be hearing more about shortly. We are so excited for this collaboration and incredibly grateful for them to be here today with us. We are also delighted to welcome all of our panelists today, and we hope you, our audience, will join us in being part of this long COVID revolution. And also I want to add a shout out to Beth at NS Captioning for providing our live captions. And during this webinar, please enter in any comments and questions in the chat, and we will discuss them at 12 o'clock. And now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Emmy Kane, Director of Strategies for High Impact and Long COVID Justice, along with our moderator and project manager for Listening for the Long Haul, Kamara Hera.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy. My pronouns are she, her. I am a mixed race, light tan skinned person with long, dark brown hair, brown eyes. I have bangs, and I'm wearing a black button-up short sleeve T-shirt with I have like a green door in my background that's blurred out. Um, First of all, I want to say thank you to Jackie and Sarah and everybody who helped make the webinar possible. Um, this has been, yeah, just has come together very quickly, and I'm just really excited for today's conversations. And I was asked to speak a little bit about long COVID justice and the work that we do through our parent organization, Strategies for High Impact. So we are, our official mission statement is we are leading collective efforts to confront the long COVID crisis while centering racial, social, economic, and disability justice. Our work is done by and for chronically ill and disabled people, our families, and our communities. We were started by chronically ill and disabled people, many of whom were sick for many years before 2020, and many of whom were newly disabled by long COVID. We came together 2021 in a moment when we saw a chance to connect the dots between long COVID and other infection associated chronic conditions like chronic Lyme, ME, CFS, and many others. And to make sure that in the temporary rush of attention paid to COVID, long COVID and COVID did not get exceptionalized among other conditions that have been historically under researched, underfunded, misunderstood, and underdiagnosed. We want to make sure that funding, or do what we could to make sure that funding, research, dollars, and attention was directed in a more holistic way. And we also wanted to organize newly disabled folks into disability justice frameworks and an intersectional approach to COVID, long COVID, and disability, and to connect those newly disabled folks to existing networks of disability organizing. I've been doing disability justice organizing for about 20 years. And it's through that perspective that I come to this work. And so we do this work through a few buckets. One is research and action, which includes policy advocacy and patient-led participatory action research projects, organizing, community organizing and network building, and then narrative change. And so one of our narrative change priorities is amplifying the voices and stories of BIPOC living with long COVID and other IACCs, again, because our communities are disproportionately impacted by long COVID, but are often left out of dominant narratives about chronic illness in general. And to that end, we run a BIPOC Communicators Fellowship. Jackie and I'm sure a few others on this call are members. And we also work on listening for the long haul, which Jackie had mentioned, which is an oral history project in partnership with the University of Illinois Chicago, and has become another way for us to amplify the voices of BIPOC living with long COVID in a narrative, again, that currently doesn't prioritize our stories despite mutual reasons. And so I think I'm going to pass this off to Kamara to talk about the work of Listening for the Long Haul in more detail and introduce the website that we will hopefully we'll be launching any day.
Thanks so much, Emmy. Good morning and hello. I'm Kamara Heron, PhD candidate in history at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and project manager for the Listening for the Long Haul Oral History Project, and one of today's moderators, as Sarah had mentioned. I'm an African-American woman with a short black afro wearing a green top. As Emmy mentioned, as a collaboration between Long COVID Justice and History Moves, a public history project based at the University of Illinois at Chicago, Listening for the Long Haul is an oral history documenting the experiences and insights of 21 people living with long COVID and associated conditions. And today I have a very exciting preview of the website that, as Emmy mentioned, will be launching soon. I'm going to share my screen now. So Listening for the Long Haul engages deeply in listening as a method for historical inquiry. And rather than as a singular linear narrative of COVID-19 and long COVID, the project is more responsive to the complex and contradictory realities of its narrators' lives. And the two primary ways into these long haul narratives are through the complete individual interviews, excuse me, arranged by our narrators here on our oral histories page, and secondly, by theme. So the listening team distilled hours of narration into 6 thematic categories that we have excerpted portions of each interview into these thematic playlists for visitors to listen in on the very surprising ways that narrators were actually speaking with one another across their interviews. So the themes we have are time, where we found narrators discussing how chronic illness shapes and warps time, as well as how they situate themselves in history, both within and beyond this particular moment in time. Next is the body, uh, where we view the body as a site, as a source of learning, discovery, and transformation. And while narrators express a range of feelings about the emotional and physical experiences of chronic illness. Next, we have community building, where you'll find narrators exploring cycles of finding, sustaining, and losing community, as well as how virtual space remains an essential site for people living with long COVID and associated conditions. Our next theme is the medical establishment and clinical settings. Narrators describe harrowing efforts in advocating for themselves and for those in their care, while being disillusioned with medical providers and healthcare institutions. Next, we have the state. You'll find narrators discussing the state's response to COVID-19 and to long COVID, as well as living through the supposed end of the COVID-19 pandemic, as declared in May 2023, as they navigate the inhospitable nature of federal and state funding support and policymaking. And here are a few of those topics, those excerpts. And lastly, we have capitalism, where narrators found themselves simultaneously questioning and raging at the imperative to be productive for capital profit, while knowing that interdependence rather than independence is the way forward. Relatedly, since Listening for the Long Haul is a fundamentally collaborative project, we thank our partners and also share resources that we have collectively sourced. And I'll end my share there. With all that said, sorry, let me go back. Okay. With all that said, the site is not live yet. It is coming along slowly and all at once. And I am, however, able to share the domains where you'll find the live site very soon. We'll share these in the chat as well as places to bookmark to visit. And now I'll stop my share. Okay, now we will shift into the most essential portion of this morning's program to hear from our incredible panelists. We'll begin by hearing from the first 3 of our 6 panelists. That's Gabriel, Leja, and Shamir, who each introduce themselves as they share their long COVID journeys, experiences with Listening for the Long Haul Oral History Project, what resources and strategies they found have helped post-infection, and anything more our panelists feels is important to share about living with chronic illness, disability, and disability justice. After which we'll take a short break. Then we'll return to hear from our remaining 3 panelists, Tracy, Maynard, and Jackie. Then we will take a second break before concluding the session with a Q&A discussion. And now, to make the best use of our time listening and breathing together, I'm happy to introduce our first panelist, Gabriel.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Sanemeterio. I am the co-founder of Strategies for High Impact and Long COVID Justice, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. Yeah, I have been living with complex chronic conditions for many years. HIV is one of them. I've been living with HIV for 17 years. I likely contracted Lyme around that time, and it went undiagnosed and untreated for about 3 years, and it was ravaging my body, my joints, and it didn't get diagnosed until I developed really bad neurological symptoms. So after those two really severe infections, I developed chronic fatigue, pain, a whole host of disabling symptoms, and eventually I was diagnosed with ME/CFS. But that's myalgic encephalomyelitis, uh, ME/CFS for short. I slow down for the interpretation. And yeah, for years, I couldn't get diagnosed because it's incredibly difficult to get an ME diagnosis. And prior to getting an appropriate diagnosis, I kept getting the wrong advice from medical professionals. They saw me as a young person. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and they insisted that I exercised and that I pushed through my symptoms because they said that I needed to improve my physical condition. Um, Needless to say, for those who know, it didn't work, and it just had me on this constant cycle of crashing and symptom exacerbation, which was very frustrating and demoralizing. Um, and I also was told by one rheumatologist that there was nothing I could do, even if I had chronic fatigue syndrome or ME/CFS, which was completely untrue. Though there are no FDA-approved treatments, there are management strategies, most importantly, pacing, which has helped me immensely. Um, I had to radically alter my life, but it really has worked to manage my symptoms more than anything. I will mention, I mean, there are medications that I have tried and they also help, but pacing is integral to how I live my life and how I manage my symptoms. This is how I came to work in the long COVID space based on my experience living with associated conditions. As you know, long COVID is not one thing, and there are more than 200 symptoms that are associated with it. So long COVID can look vastly different for everyone who's experiencing it. And I was very fortunate to not get COVID. So I worked on long COVID issues based on my experience living with ME. And the first time I got COVID was a couple of years into the pandemic, and it's when masking became optional. So I think that is pertinent to highlight how the pandemic really made many of us aware of our interconnectedness and the air we breathe and how important it is. So once mitigation strategies were highly politicized and became um, were being abandoned is when I contracted COVID for the first time. Um, I was able to get Paxlovid. I was very fortunate, and I experienced a fully symptomatic rebound. So it extended how sick I was. And after I developed even more symptoms, and my ME/CFS symptoms became more unpredictable, and I developed symptoms that were very consistent with long COVID. And even 6 months to a year after I had it, I continued to experience the symptoms. At that point, I asked my HIV provider if I could get a diagnosis of long COVID because of how it had thrown my life into disarray. And my HIV provider, who's great in many aspects, said to me, well, you already had a lot going on, so I don't know. And to this day, long COVID shows up in my chart as self-reported, and it's not like on the list of uh, sort of provider uh, given diagnosis, which, many institutions conduct uh, studies through electronic health records. And that's why I felt it was necessary to have the diagnosis in my record, because they don't come and ask us what our experiences are. They go and look at the electronic health records to look at to do epidemiological studies, to look at symptomatology, to do um, population, um, etc. So, as a Latin person, I thought it was important to have that in my record. Anyway, um, I got COVID a second time, and that's when breathing became difficult with COVID, and not necessarily because I had respiratory symptoms, but because of the deep fatigue that it exacerbated. And this would really make sense to those who have experienced this extreme fatigue, that it sort of just debilitates the body at its deepest core. And so even getting enough air becomes difficult because it's such an effort. Um, so with those experiences, working on listening for the long haul has been humbling and rewarding, because I got to experience community and connect with people who understand. And even if they didn't experience the same as me, um, they just trust and believe my experience. Like, I didn't need to convince them. And this shared experience, uh, for many of us, the shared experience is actually using our limited energy to explain and try to convince most of our loved ones and others, such as medical providers, of what we're experiencing, to try to get them to understand that symptoms that they can't see, symptoms that fluctuate in severity, are actually happening to us. And that it's not just that we're anxious or we're depressed or we don't want to get out of bed. Um, those are a lot of misconceptions that I think are very common. You can see them throughout the stories, in listening for the long haul. Um, I try to practice disability justice. I mean, I work in the field and I also try to practice it. I'm an educator. I teach graduate level classes, and I try to build time so that assignments have flexible due dates for my students, for instance, and I encourage them to not come to class when they're not feeling well, since educational institutions have become really lax on masking and actually now discourage it or flat out prohibit it, which has been incredibly disheartening. But I think it's really interesting when I see a student ask for an extension, and I tell them to please make sure they get to rest, and then they can tell me when they can have the assignment in. And um, for many, it's the first time they experience it from a professor. So these are just little examples of how pacing and living my life in crib time have helped me extend grace and try to live by the principles set by Sins Invalid and their 10 principles of disability justice, and other concepts such as crib time from many disability theorists, such as Alison Kafer, who was mentioned earlier. Um, and yeah, I think that's enough from me, probably. There are other wonderful panelists that I'm really honored to be here sharing this space with. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. And now we'll hear from Lidra whenever you're ready.
Hi there, my name is Lija Navarro. I am speaking to you from Toronto in Canada. I am a white woman in my mid-40s. I have brown hair that's a little bit longer than my shoulders, and it's half pulled back, and brown eyes, red shirt, and I have paintings with black, white, and red long brushstrokes behind me. I'm going to share my screen to do a bit of a slideshow. Bear with me a tiny bit here. Okay, so to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Lija again, and I've been living with long COVID for a little bit over 4 years, but I had ME, CFS, and POTS for 8 years before that. I wasn't able to get diagnosed until right around when I developed long COVID. So I, like many of the other panelists, have a long-standing experience with chronic illness, a long-standing experience with being ignored by medicine, with medical misogyny, being told that it was normal to be tired when I had a small child, when I had a long workup for POTS, like a 2-week Holter monitor and stress tests and all of these other things, being told that I had anxiety. So that's my personal experience. And part of why I'm here is because I am an independent or freelance journalist, and I've been covering long COVID and disability a lot over the past few years, since becoming more disabled myself. I'm going to have to take breaks throughout because I have difficulty breathing, especially when I'm talking for a long time, which I don't do super frequently. I also just want to back up a tiny bit to say thank you to Sarah and Jackie for organizing this. The ability to be in this space with other disabled people, and other chronically ill people who do things like sit in their beds like I am with my pillows behind me, and who need to take breaks to be able to breathe. It feels so like such a caring community that we can normalize that, since I think a lot of us in our everyday life feel like that is, that we have to apologize for that. I'm trying not to apologize for it in general, but so I'm also a contributing writer at the Sick Times, which, if you aren't aware of the Sick Times yet, it's an amazing resource. It's a nonprofit news outlet that was started a little bit over a year ago, just to cover long COVID, the continuing COVID pandemic, ME/CFS, and other associated illnesses. And I, independent of my connection to them, I really believe that the Sick Times is doing the most important work on long COVID in the media. I also am the editorial director of the Disabled Journalists Association, which is getting ready to launch very shortly. And we're, in addition to supporting disabled journalists, we're also going to be producing disability coverage. So I encourage you to follow us on social media. And when I'm done with my presentation, I can include links in the chat. Oops, let me see. Okay, so first, Jackie asked me to speak a little bit about some work that I've done on long COVID. And I want to start with talking about a very personal essay that I wrote. I wrote it in early 2023, so it's interesting. I don't necessarily feel the same way as I did then, but it was about me having to grapple with becoming really, really sick from long COVID, and the way that society has left people with long COVID and disabled people and immunocompromised people behind, as the pandemic continues. And so it was written for Switchard, which is a literary magazine out of the University of Tulsa. So I'll read a little bit just to give you snippets from the piece. This is the very beginning paragraph. My world is 640 square feet. I spend most days on my bed, as I am now, propped up by pillows, my legs covered with a wool blanket to staunch the pain. I forgot to mention, sorry, this is an aside, I also have small fiber neuropathy, which a lot of us with long COVID and ME/CFS have. From my windows, all I can see are a row of ginkgos, a dozen condo high-rises, and open sky. On a lucky day, there will be snow, or an orange sunset, or a red-tailed hawk floating on warm currents hunting for prey. Describing what was once my life is like trying to recapture a sensation, a place that only ever existed in a dream. Yet what I mourn most, more than moving my body with ease or even leaving my apartment, is my lost faith in humanity. What I have been forced to witness, I cannot unsee. Bodies like mine, lives like mine are the future, and we are forsaken and ignored precisely because of that truth. We represent what most of the world does not want to recognize as possible. The pandemic is still here, and it may yet come for you. I'm going to keep reading a little bit, but I just wanted to, as an aside, say I wholeheartedly believe this 2 years later. I believe that the world will only start to pay attention to long COVID when so many people have this illness that it's not ignorable anymore. And I think with every month, with every year, that becomes more and more true. Um, but it's going to get to the point where, you know, more than half the population has long COVID, and people are going to have to start paying attention to it when it's far too late. This is about my very early infection and then reinfection. In the semi-conscious fog of my afternoon naps, my legs aching, I repeated to myself all I would do if I could ever move again. I will walk, I told myself, ice skate, hike, bike, swim, dance. I understood that nothing was the same. Showering, even seated, left me feeling as if I had just run 5 marathons. Sex, on the very rare occasions that we attempted it, left me gasping so forcefully for air that I cried from fear. There was so much wrapped up in learning to live with disability, in my emotional relationship to my own body. Mostly, I felt profound loss, since there was no assurance I would ever recover. I ached to travel, to be outside. In waking fantasies, I returned to my favorite places. The island off Sardinia, where I ate fresh pasta with sea urchin roe and swam topless. The Yukon, where I taught my child to love hiking and spotted a grizzly bear. The foggy beaches and scorching mountain rivers of my Northern California adolescence. Later, I would remember 2022 as the summer when people stopped caring. The Washington Post interviewed Americans taking flights while knowingly COVID positive, and CDC research later showed that 81% of airplane bathroom wastewater samples had Omicron RNA. Friends who were very careful about COVID in 2020 and 2021 now posted photos on social media of themselves traveling or crowded inside public spaces, unmasked, as if they couldn't be reinfected, couldn't get long COVID. Did it only ever matter to protect themselves? Sorry, I just need to take a quick breathing break. I grieve all that has been taken from me, the enjoyment of my body, the friends of decades who have disappeared, my health, the chance to watch my child experience a normal childhood. And I grieve for my family. Our lives are filled with indignity after indignity. My husband must wash my hair now, bring me food in bed. He's always dead tired and on the brink, and we receive so little help. This fact alone leaves me aching. I am terrified of the future. I fear that if my husband ever becomes ill, I won't be able to care for him as he has so selflessly cared for me. I fear my life will be cut short by years or decades by COVID's lingering effects, heart attacks, strokes, dementia that scientists warn about due to damage to our brains, diabetes possibly lurking behind my new blood sugar imbalance. I fear for my body while alive and wonder how much more suffering I will be forced to withstand. I'm just going to take a brief pause to say that since I wrote this piece, which I'll include the link in the chat, or somebody may already have done that, I've really come into being disabled and come into the disabled community. I mean, I was always disabled since I was born with neurodivergence. And then I didn't understand myself to be disabled until I got long COVID and became so much sicker. And now I use a wheelchair. But, it's been a really powerful experience and an affirming experience to understand that I'm disabled and understand that I am part of this community that believes so strongly in justice for our people, and believes in caring for each other and caring for people so that they won't become chronically ill. So if you do read this piece, read it understanding that it's part of a journey. Um, as I'm sure many of you who have long COVID and who have other chronic illnesses and disabilities probably can understand, recognize that you have been through similar journeys. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my reporting. I early on in long COVID, I'm being a journalist, I'm a bit of a news junkie. And so I paid a lot of attention to who was being covered about long COVID and who was not being covered. And who was being covered was white people. And, often, strangely, a lot of white men, which, as we know, women get long COVID as much as 4 times as often as men, or 4 times as frequently. So I started to pay attention to what was not what was public, but what wasn't being published in news articles, which was that people of color were disproportionately affected by long COVID, especially Latinos and African Americans. This is talking in the US. And so I sought to figure out how to report on this. So the first piece that I'm going to talk about is one that I wrote for Palabra, which is the multimedia outlet of the National Association for Hispanic Journalists. The piece was called What Recovery? And as you can see from this really beautiful illustration that was done, um, I'll get into the details about it in a minute, but I just want to also acknowledge that I received funding to work on the piece from the Journalism and Women's Symposium, which received funding in turn from the Commonwealth Fund. And then I also received separate funding from the Center for Rural Strategies and GRIST, which is a nonprofit environmental news outlet. So I focused the reporting in this piece specifically on an area in Washington State in the Yakima Valley where I had contacts and where it was kind of a great example of the ways in which the early pandemic impacted Latina people. Like many of you, I have even more allergies than I had before COVID. So as I was saying, I reported the piece in the Yakima Valley in Washington, which is, I believe it's the nation's 12th biggest agricultural production area. So what played out was that a lot of folks who had been infected early in the pandemic, because agriculture was considered an essential work, were infected and then, developed long COVID. And even though at that time, and I'm sure it's still probably the case, statistically, Latinos were the hardest hit by long COVID. There was no specific long COVID treatment, and people were having a really hard time getting diagnosed. So, as I did with the last piece, I'll read some snippets and then maybe tell a little bit more about the story as it goes. And when I wrote this piece, it was the first comprehensive, really intensive look at Latinos being the hardest hit by long COVID. This was in December of 2023. Other outlets were not covering this at all. There's been some coverage since, but it's still not something that the news media really wants to pay attention to. In another story that I was working on, I actually had a Pulitzer Prize winning veteran journalist tell me that I was having a hard time selling a story. In fact, it may have been for this story, but they said that I was having a hard time selling stories about women of color with long COVID because I had to make it so that editors could see that their readers would relate. And so, why didn't I show that, the more women of color who were infected, or sorry, who developed long COVID, then, there wouldn't be people to serve you your coffee. There wouldn't be people to clean your house. This was with the understanding that is still very common in journalism, that the quote unquote average reader is a white person. So that just tells you a little bit about how the media works, what the media thinks is important, and what the media actively thinks is not important, which is marginalized people. So this is from early in the piece. What should have been instantly clear, given how disproportionately Black and Brown communities were hit by COVID-19, was that long COVID would wallop Americans of color. Are the nation and the medical community willfully ignoring Latino long haulers after sending them into clouds of coronavirus to keep society's privilege safe? And I spoke to somebody from the UFW Foundation, which is the United Farm Workers philanthropic wing. And as she said, you can't harvest food through Zoom. So what happened was in the Yakima Valley, the Latina community was making sure that the nation could eat while becoming infected. I will later drop her information for you all to follow. Carla Monterroso is an incredibly important, very early stage long hauler, and she's just a powerhouse mind that you'll see a lot of these quotes are from her. So she spent her first year bedbound, and she says, with long COVID, we have to rest in a way that in our culture or Latina culture is very difficult to achieve. We really judge exhaustion. Carla says, Latino ethics of hard work aren't the principles that are going to serve us with this illness. And that was something that came up really frequently in reporting this piece, was how people how Latina people who either had long COVID, might have long COVID, or were family members of people who had long COVID had a really difficult time reconciling disability with their lived experience, even if they were disabled and weren't ready to accept or acknowledge that. It was in large part because of work and how central work was to their communities. And I think some of the later quotes will say that too. Victoria was one of my sources who was not comfortable using her real name, but she developed long COVID, and even though she had graduate degrees in health related fields, she had a really hard time getting diagnosed and getting any kind of care. And she said, people in this communities use their bodies for work. And then another community health worker said, if you're Latino, you're a hard worker, period. What's the opposite of that? If you're not a hard worker, what are you? People don't want to say, I came to this country to work, and all of a sudden I can't anymore. Another person who you all should follow, and I'll put her name in the chat, is Dr. Monica Verduzco Gutierrez. And she says, or she believes that true rates of long COVID in Latinas are higher than any reported statistic. And Carla Monterroso agrees. She said, "We are underdiagnosed by a severe amount. I do not believe the numbers." Our community has not bounced back, says Angie Hinojos, executive director of Centro Cultural Mexicano. This is an organization in Washington. That is going to affect our earning potential for generations. And then the United Farm Workers Foundation, they told me that even though they're not tracking it yet, or they weren't a year and a half ago, that their union organizers hear a lot about long COVID and how it's keeping people out of work. And then something that was a huge theme in this piece was how difficult it was for Latinas to get diagnosed with long COVID. Their doctors would say, oh, it's probably something else. Or, this woman, Victoria, who I mentioned, she kept being told that it was her allergies. It was her allergies. She had this chronic cough. She couldn't sleep at night. And her doctors just said it was allergies. So I asked Dr. Verduzco Gutierrez about this. And she said, I think that the doctors are not asking, they're not looking. Do the doctors just look at your diabetes or your blood pressure, but not ask you, did your diabetes get worse when you had COVID? Did your blood pressure get worse? Did you not have blood pressure problems before? And now, do you get dizzy? Do you get headaches? Do you have pains? She believes that many, if not most, Latinas with long COVID aren't getting care, whom she calls the ones that were missing. And these are a couple other quotes from Carla Monterroso. I have thought a lot about how much it takes to put yourself in danger every single day. You have to say, oh, it's fine, people are exaggerating, or you get that you're in existential hell all of the time. And she said this when we were talking about, how Latina workers who, are still in essential jobs, even though that's not a category that people really talk about anymore, and just can't stop, have to keep going to work, even if they're at risk. And then we also talked about how people with long COVID really embody the pandemic. And she told me how she had kind of been forgotten by some of her family members. And she said, I am living, breathing proof of a pandemic no one wants to admit is still happening, and that there is no cure for what I have. That is a really scary possibility. This was again from her. I'm afraid for us. It's just going to be disability after disability after disability. We have to start in our small communities, building caring infrastructure so that we can help each other. I am clear. No one is coming to save us. We've got to save us. And this, I believe that this is so related to this event, to long COVID justice, to listening for the long haul, that we all have to support each other because we've learned firsthand how little support there is. So another aspect of this piece that was really, really important to me. So it was the piece was also translated into Spanish. And something that was really important was that it included really hands-on, easy, like plain language, essentially, instructions about how to get help if you think that you have long COVID, so that people could take their phone with these instructions to their doctor and say, hey, listen, read this article, or I want you to refer me to a long COVID clinic. And then also we had graphics about wearing a mask, getting the vaccine, how to rest when you have COVID to potentially try to avoid developing long COVID, and also the idea of taking Paxlovid and metformin. And this was really important to me to have these visuals because, as I said, it's just something that, people could show to their family members, people could show to others in their community. And it's just a way to get information out that other sources of information may not be as effective. I'm trying to think really quickly if there was anything else about this article that I meant to mention. There's a lot of information in the piece about what Latinos face and still face. And then related to this, I just wanted to give a shout out to the package that Long COVID Justice and the Sick Times produced called Long COVID Essentials, which are these resource sheets that are 1 or 2 pages. I think in English they're all 1 page, but in Spanish they're often 2 pages, about a plethora of long COVID and ME topics, as well as POTS and a bunch of other things. And I translated them into Spanish, and just, reading these pieces, even as somebody who is super well informed, and I read a lot of medical journals about long COVID, and I learned a ton. I learned a lot about potential meds that might help. So somebody may have already put that in the chat, because I see that the chat is lighting up a little bit, but these are great resources, both English and Spanish. And I know that there's, maybe the possibility, if there's the human power, to also translate them into other languages. And just really quickly, I unfortunately couldn't get the audio together to share this, but I also produced a piece in the summer of last year for a health program on NPR called The Pulse, which also received funding from the Commonwealth Fund. And this piece was looking specifically at long COVID care in New York City. And, it was so frustrating. The main person the main person with long COVID who I focused on in this piece, whose name is Sabrina, she is Puerto Rican and African American, and she's had long COVID for, I think at that point it was 3 years. And even though she saw a doctor at one of the hospitals that has long COVID clinic, she had never been referred. She actually didn't even know that there was specific long COVID care. And it just demonstrates how poorly long COVID medical resources are reaching people of color, especially women of color. And instead, many people, I think at all of the long COVID clinics whose directors I spoke with, they all told me that their patient lists, or their patient, populations, are majority white. So what happens is, white people, white women in particular, are the ones who are, have the resources, have the time, maybe have the spoons to find care, but other people, in fact, the people who are hardest hit, women of color, are not having equal access to that care. So that's it for me, and I hope to hear from some of you who have been listening in, and feel free, please, always to contact me if you have story ideas about long COVID, MECFS, the pandemic, disability, that you feel like need to get out there, and I'm happy to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leja. And now I'd like to welcome Shamir to speak and share.
Hey everybody, this is me, Shamir. I am a African American or Black woman with a short faded haircut. I'm wearing clear glasses with black rims. I am also wearing a blue top and black earrings with that are felt with gold trimming. I'm going to tell you right now that today, as the old folks used to say in my community, I have a crying spirit. As some of you all may know, I am still very much fully entrenched in grief over the loss of my aunt, D. Carol Smith, or who some of you all may know as Auntie D, because I've been talking about her a lot lately on all of my socials and my Substack. So I am going to do my very best, as I always try to do, to get through this. Bear with me. And I won't take up too much of your time. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my presentation now, because I do have a presentation. I tried very hard to be descriptive about the photos that I included, and I'm going to go from there. Thank you beforehand, and thank you all to those of you all who invited me. I appreciate that, and thank you so much for your patience as I have not been able to attend meetings or be as engrossed with the planning process as I like to be. So because I didn't know much about today, I decided to do what a teacher does. And I decided to talk about the fact that everybody breathes fine until they can't. And so in this, I'm going to talk to you about how long COVID forced me, a Black woman, to reevaluate places and people that I once deemed safe. I am a long COVID activist for over 5 years. I am a writer, speaker, and consultant in that industry and arena because I do believe that long COVID now is its own health industry. And I am a perpetual line stepper. Some of you all may know that for the good or the bad. My questions about the racism and the exclusion of Black people in long COVID and MECFS spaces has gotten me into a lot of trouble, some good and some not so good. So in the photo, you see me. I'm a brown complected Black woman with a very short haircut. The photo that you see is encased in a lime green, yellowish colored circle. I'm also the director of the Black Long COVID Experience, which is right now in the very early stages of trying to inspire and educate and motivate Black people with long COVID to tell their stories, to safely advocate for their long COVID needs and healthcare, and also for social services that we hope will still remain in place after this year. Wink, wink, if you know what I mean. So breathing is a cool thing, right? We don't even think about breathing most of all. And this is paying homage to breathing for justice. So I wanted to talk about breathing. And so breathing is so cool because we don't have to think about it. It doesn't require us to do much of anything. It doesn't threaten us because it comes from our autonomic nervous system. And we oftentimes do it involuntarily. I'm sorry. We oftentimes do it without having to put much consideration into it. So the process is that the air travels to and from our lungs and our muscles contract and it relaxes in order to provide us with some oxygen so that we can live. That's the coolest thing in the world to me. As a spiritual person, when I think about, what the Bible says about God breathing into our lungs, I get excited, especially I've been watching these videos preparing for this, looking how the lungs takes in the air, pushes it out. It travels and like a jet in our bodies in order to assure that we receive the proper amount of air that we should. So let's talk about why the breathing may change when it comes to the pros of it. What are the good things that happens when our breathing does change, right? When we do think about our breathing. So our breathing changes when we are excited about something or someone, when we are exhilarated, impassioned. I remember how I felt the very first day I realized that I was going to be a good teacher. It wasn't the very first day, October 15th of 2015 in my career. It was December 15th, 2015. I realized then that I had the guts, the bravery, I had the wherewithal, and I had been training all my life to be a teacher. And so that is something that still to this day impassions me. Also, when you have confidence, there's something relaxing about your breathing when you know that you are where you are supposed to be with the people that you're supposed to be with at the right time. Let's talk about why sometimes there are cons and our breathing changes. And so I've realized that fear causes our breathing to change in the opposite direction. Anxiety, depression, trauma, being paranoid, and being very distrustful or distrusting can cause our breathing to change in a very negative way. So let's talk about, as a Black woman, I can only speak to you from my lens at this point in time. As a Black woman, let's talk about some of the things that would cause my breathing or our breathing to positively change. Let's give some flowers to how to when Black women breathe um, uh, uh, properly and positively. So for me, when my favorite song comes on, I go crazy. My breathing gets erratic. I'm impassioned. When I passed my second driving test, when I passed that test after I failed it the first time, failed it after only 1 minute of driving, I was very distraught. But when I got my license, that second, oh, I was over the moon. When my husband got down on his knee on Sunday, that morning when he proposed to me back in 2023, after 6 months of dating, oh, I was so stoked. And so, also, as I mentioned to you, the passion in your career or your education. Black women, you talk to any Black woman, when she is involved, like she's really entrenched in her career or her education, oh, there is nothing that stops that sister. She is always breathing and ready, prepared to do what she is supposed to be doing or what she loves to do at that particular time. Some of us who like a little bit of for some of us who like a little bit of fear in our breathing or fun fear, horror movies. Now, look, I'm not a fan of horror movies, but I do know some homegirls who love the thrill of horror films. Like, for instance, people have been telling me about Ryan Coogler's Sinners, and most of the homegirls I talk to, they are like, "Oh my God, I was breathing fast the entire time, but it was such a good movie." Okay. Here you see me in a classroom, which I miss very much. I haven't been in a classroom in, oh my God, over 5 years. I'm standing in front of a whiteboard with a lot of English and language arts guidance and chart paper and everything. Because in my classroom, we used to get down. That's because I was passionate about what I did. So let's talk about, on the flip side, the other side of the spectrum, what may cause a Black woman's breathing to negatively change? We don't focus on this enough. Um, I don't know about you, but if maybe you have Black friends or other people, those who are joining us today who are Black. Um, have you ever been followed in a store? I have. Um, Terrifying. Most Black women, if you listen to them intently and with compassion and empathy, even if they might not tell you what causes them to breathe erratically in a negative direction, they're saying to you, I have a fear of not being and doing enough. Oftentimes, Black women don't breathe properly. We are more likely than anybody else to have asthma and bronchitis, pneumonia, and other things because America, sadly, is the lowest ranking healthcare system according to the Commonwealth Fund, which did an independent study about the ranking of healthcare in the world, and we rank the lowest. We breathe erratically or not well when it comes to poor healthcare because there is a lack of equity in American healthcare. There's a lack of access to care. That means we can't even get in the door to get healthcare. And it also is because when doctors do see us, they do not offer us treatment plans or management plans to help us care for ourselves and our conditions in a way that is conducive and culturally responsive to us. Black women, my husband is an MTA bus driver in New York City. And every day I worry about whether he will come home or not. Not just because I'm afraid of him having a bus accident, but I've seen recently an uptick in attack of bus drivers from passengers. And I'm always wondering, will my baby come back home because someone got too pissed and decided to fight him or injure him in any type of way? As a Black woman, my breathing becomes very labored when I'm in an all white setting. Why? Because usually people are staring at me, they're looking at my hair, they're assessing me, looking at my body, my clothes. They're wondering whether I fit in. And they're wondering if I feel like I fit in, why do I think I feel like I fit in? So then that makes me feel like I don't fit in. So that's something interesting to take into consideration. So here's the thing about me and my breathing. I'm reading a book now that talks about emotional immature parents. And so I'll tell you this, I am a champion at labored, fearful, paranoid breathing. How did I learn that? I breathed like that since I was about 4 or 5. This little girl is not me, but she looks like me, doesn't she? She is my niece, Monica. I call her Stankadanka because my brother and I are estranged. I don't see her often. She's another person that makes me feel like sometimes the breathing becomes labor because I wish I had a relationship with her, but I don't. But here's what I'll tell you about childhood. And so, those of you all who are raising children, you're raising grandchildren, or your nieces, or your nephews, or whomever, or if you are somebody's honorary auntie or uncle, or whomever, I'll tell you some things that can cause a child that is raised by an emotionally immature parent, why our breathing may change in a negative direction. It is because I learned at a very young age that Sandra, my parent, she did not like or love me. When she would come in the door, I could tell just by how she closed the door or slammed it, how she was feeling and what kind of evening that we were going to have. It's the reason why today I've had about 5 or 6 panic attacks. I could tell by the sound of her voice. I could hear her breathing, her sighing, that whether or not it was going to be a hellacious night or a decent one, because they were never great. And children learn very early how to be perceptive based upon how their parents care for them. So while some people may think, oh my goodness, why do Black women have problems with their breathing? It's because usually most of the time we have been having these kinds of issues for years, since childhood. Being raised by an emotionally immature parent teaches you how to be perceptive. So one thing about me, I am very clear when people love me, when they don't like me, when they tolerate me, and when I need to pretend, or when I need to just disengage. Monica, as I mentioned, Stankadanka, she is a Black little girl with mocha brown skin. She's wearing a purple hoodie with she has a pink and purple, a purple and blue lunch tray. And she's holding some vegan sausage because y'all, she's vegan. And she looks just like her auntie, who she calls Shamil. She doesn't call me Shamir. She calls me Shamil. Where should Black women feel safe in their breathing? Home, on the job, at school. We should also have the right to feel like we can breathe in hospitals and doctors' offices. The irony. At the park, at concerts, at outside events, and social groups like long COVID social communities, and also government offices. Let's talk about why I no longer feel safe in a few of these places, because I have been vexed and judged about being disabled from people with their internal and external biases. I've experienced racism, sexism, and discrimination. Story time. Because I've already learned how to be a labored, terrified breather since I was 5. It didn't hit me until maybe my 6th visit to the hospital in 2020, when I knew by then I had caught COVID. Nobody else seemed to know, but I did. I knew then that I had caught COVID and had long COVID, thanks to so many of you who were on Twitter at the time and in other safe spaces. I knew by June that I had long COVID. And it wasn't until the 6th visit started to pay attention to how I would breathe when I would go to the registration desk, when I would be led back to a cold emergency room or triage space. And then I would realize, oh my goodness, I'm hardly breathing. And it's not because I'm in love with the doctor I'm talking to. It was because I knew that that white man, usually, or man, or woman who had seen me before, would automatically say to me, which they often did, "What are you doing back here again, Black woman?" They didn't say that part, but I know that they were thinking it. It's the reason why the very first white doctor I met, he said to me, "I looked at your chart. I see you're a teacher. What you doing in here? You anxious about the pandemic?" And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm sick. And so places where I should feel safe breathing, I no longer feel safe. Even when I go to the pharmacy, CVS pharmacy, every time they want to stop and talk to me when they fill this prescription 5 times, and they want to say, "Oh, hey, let me pull you to the side so I can figure out, are you supposed to have this medicine with this medicine?" Yeah, but I start breathing weird because I'm thinking to myself, now you done filled this prescription 5 times. Why are you looking at me as if I shouldn't have it? Government offices, I can't stand going to social services offices. By the way, they just closed the Social Security office in Poughkeepsie. I wonder why. I can't stand going there because those people, no matter how proper I talk, or hood I talk, or how I dress, or how I look, they are judging me. They want me to be as disabled as my paperwork tells them that I am. Now, let's talk about other reasons that long COVID affects grief and breathing and causes people to breathe with grief, especially this Black woman or other Black women. Recently, as you all know, I experienced the worst 4 months of my life watching the woman that I've loved my entire life dying from uterine cancer, family estrangement. Oh, I know all about that with long COVID. I've had to make some very difficult decisions about my life to protect myself, and that includes family estrangement. That causes grief. I don't know about you, but for me as a long COVID patient, each and every time I deal with something more difficult now, I can tell you it feels like I'm not breathing at all. And the thing is about long COVID is that it was one of the first ways I realized that I am not breathing properly. Now, they said to all of us in the hospital in 2020, you have to be short of breath, have a fever, and whatever else they were saying to us that made us prerequisites for testing, which many of us didn't get tested. I had none of those. But long COVID also taught me that I have been holding my breath proverbially and literally all my life because I'm a Black woman in America who is now disabled. People pleasing. I used to do that all the time, and I still do sometimes, but I'm telling you one thing, it's dissipating. Something else that makes me breathe with grief is when we have groups of long COVID communities and organizations who say that they are inclusive and they're global, but they're really not. And everything they do doesn't match what they say. And I also have a fear and I grieve over the fact that I wonder, Shamir, do Black people even care about what you're talking about? Because the Black media doesn't. Sometimes I feel like my message only falls on the ears of white women, which is another ironic thing. But I'm wondering if my purpose is to educate, motivate, and inspire Black people, how come Black people don't seem to care? So I breathe with grief over those things. But alas, there are some things that I have done outside of complaining and being hypocritical that have caused me sometimes to breathe safer. And so when I got tired of complaining, I just started to say to myself, what can you do besides sit here in your anger and your hurt and your frustration, cussing these people out on Twitter all day? So I decided to start hosting, doing what I want to see the world do. So I started hosting and planning racially inclusive events. Sorry about the way I spell and misspelled it. And emotionally safe events. So last year we had the Teal Reveal, which was a beautiful, beautiful virtual prom for long COVID and MECFS communities or chronically ill communities. It was so beautiful, and I hope to do it again this year if I feel up to it. This February, I hosted the BLC, which is the Black Long COVID Black History Month Social Chronically Committed, which was a 10-day event on all socials where I asked people to participate in the prompts because I'm a teacher at my core. And what also makes me breathe easier is when I'm helping somebody. And I don't always have to tell you who I help, but I'll tell you some things. Um, with the chronically committed event or campaign, I created a game called Black Long COVID Virtual Bingo, which raised I'm happy to say over $200. And I donated half of that to a beautiful young lady, 16 years old in Charlotte, North Carolina, who has long COVID. Her mother, Brooke Keaton, some of you all may be familiar with. This baby stopped being able to walk properly and was bedridden for a while. And doctors still can't tell her the reasons why. We know it's long COVID, but we don't know how specific it is. So I donated half of that to her and her family because helping people is what gives me the most joy. Also, because I understand how many of us physically have a harder time breathing. Many women or people with breasts or constrictions or things like that. I started just saying to myself, okay, the bras you can't fit anymore because I done gained some weight, which also impacts my breathing because of long COVID. I can't do too much exercise. I donate bras, clothing, and shoes to chronically ill communities. And recently, while I'm reading this book about emotionally immature parents, I breathe easier because I made the tough decision to end 2 of my emotionally unsafe familial relationships. That's tough to talk about still, but it does. When I think about where I'll be when I think about where I'll be when I fully understand why I had to end these relationships, I know I'll breathe easier. Here's where you can find me. Here's a photo of my Auntie D, who I miss very much. Both of us have our hair shaved. We have on gray tops and we're smiling together. You can find me on the Blackest Side of Long COVID on Substack. You can find me at the Black Long COVID Experience. You can find me here in my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shamir. And what a beautiful picture to share. with us in your grief. Now we'll take the first break of the day. I believe we'll set the timer for 7 minutes. And when we return to the remainder of our panelists to continue to hear stories of long COVID and associated conditions. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back for part 1 of the Breathing for Justice webinar. We will go ahead and continue our program and hear from our panelists, Tracy, Maynard, and Jackie, who will each introduce themselves and share their journeys with long COVID, their experiences with listening for the long haul, anything that they found helpful in their post-infection breathing, and anything more each panelist would like to share about living with chronic illness, disability, and about disability justice. And now I'll welcome Tracy and turn it over to her.
Hello, everybody. I'm gonna start out by saying I'm extremely nervous. I'm sort of half reading from a script. I'm typically happy to talk in front of people. I've always been kind of comfortable on stage, but here on screen, it's different. It's isolated and away from everybody, and I can't feel the room and I can't get that human energy back. So I never know if I've lost the crowd without that connection, without that kind of immediate feedback. So I apologize in advance for what might be a stilted and hesitant delivery. I also have to contend with, as was mentioned before, the limitations that long COVID has placed on my body and my mind. Um, so I want to assure you that if I get stuttering or caught in a loop, repeating a word, that I'm fine with it. I'm not worried and I'm not embarrassed, and you don't need to be either. So everything is going to be more or less all right. So here we go. My name is Tracy Thompson, and for the next little while, I'm going to be lying to you. I'm going to pretend to be okay, which is a privilege. There's a lot of people with severe long COVID, severe or very severe presentations of this that don't have the option of sitting up and talking for 10 to 15 minutes, which honestly, I am already tired just from having done this much. But I'm going to ignore the pain, the nausea, the disorientation, and looming sort of large in the back of my head, a very strong desire to slip quietly away. I have rested for days to offset the ever-present fatigue that I feel and to try and stave off the crushing fatigue that will probably hit me tomorrow. I pre-written some of these words so that the amorphous tinnitus, the neural tinnitus that we refer to as brain fog that amputates my recall and stunts my imagination won't be as obvious. And I'm going to try very hard to maintain the veneer of professionalism. I'm sorry, I forgot to describe myself. I have on a gray collared shirt with small silver swallows printed on it, oversized black rimmed glasses. I'm a light skinned black woman, and I am wearing a salt and pepper, sort of wavy shoulder length wig. I am sitting up in bed, propped up against a red pillow. As I said, I'm going to try hard to maintain a veneer of professionalism that's required to be taken seriously. I put on these clothes and hair to tell you that I'm a trustworthy person, that I'm one of you, because our fear of disability and chronic illness is so great that it requires the negation of its effects, even as we claim to honor and investigate it. Truthfully, I'm not really one of you. Often in these spaces, I find that I am a poor cousin. I was expelled from high school and have approximately half a semester of art school under my belt. My first career was as a children's book buyer, my second, a bartender, my third, and pretty satisfying, a chef. I hate meetings. I hate sitting still. And I had crafted my work life to avoid office culture, emails, and what was then, I guess, Skype, who really dropped the ball on their advantage. The irony of this might be considered a bit much even for someone like O. Henry, because now I exist almost exclusively through online meetings, paperworks, charts, and a morbid emptiness that passes for life. I'm not built for this. I don't think anyone is built for this. I came down with COVID about 2 weeks after the test run of my what was supposed to be a series of diaspora-themed brunch pop-ups, and 2 days before restaurants were closed in what is now exaggerated referred to as the lockdown. My initial infection was mild. I honestly didn't believe I had COVID. I'd worked unknowingly sick to shut down the kitchen where I had my regular job, sending salvageable goods to the food bank slash soup kitchen just down the street. Open containers and half-prep meals were shared out amongst our staff and our regulars. I stayed 6 feet away from everybody and sanitized every surface, including myself. Camaraderie was still high, though. We imagined 2 weeks of quote unquote tough times before we were back at our respective helms of the bar, the stove, and the table. For restaurants, those weeks became months. And for me, those months became years. Years of endlessly falling down the darkest of rabbit holes, leading not to a cozy warren, but to the Byzantine labyrinth of long COVID and its associated conditions. I did never suffer the classic symptoms of breathlessness, the clogged lungs, or the struggling to breathe. How I did, however, and still do, endure days, weeks, and months of air hunger when the breath in my lung refuses to transfer over to my bloodstream, causing my oxygen saturation to dip into the 70s and 80s on a regular basis. My lungs, according to the tests we currently have available, are fine. My brain and body, however, are starving for oxygen. Like many of the afflictions associated with this illness, breathing is the easy part, the part I have control over. And this is where the fantasy of autonomy ends, both internally and unfortunately, not for the first time, or last, I imagine, externally. As the untold mechanisms that make the machine of your body hum are suddenly out of whack, and you realize quickly out of your control, you turn to healthcare professionals for help. And here again, despite your efforts, despite your careful presentation, find yourself at the less than merciful mercy of systemic isms and phobias. I am frustrated when people insist on being surprised that in a world where racism, misogyny, classism, ableism, fat, queer, and transphobia run rampant, that the world of medicine suffers the same ills. It's not okay to still be shocked by these things. White coats and a set of scrubs are now held in the same reverence, ones reserved for white collars and black habits. They're not only not immune to these failings, but are often designed to amplify them. We've heard enough stories where Black, Indigenous, racialized folks, marginalized folks are dismissed, accused of drug seeking, outright harmed, or in worst case scenario, lose their lives. But parts of my story are not so different. A cardiologist acknowledged my heart damage, but insisted it must be related to a non-existent cocaine addiction, as though that was reason to refuse me care. An internist refused to pass along standard referrals. An emergency doc refused a procedure that I'd been sent in for and went so far as to tell me that the procedure was no longer performed at any hospital anywhere. It took me 3 months to correct that mistake. A PCP heard me on a radio interview and offered to be my doctor, going so far as to contact my healthcare team, arranging tests and blood work until they saw my face, and suddenly I was out of area. I was asked about my marijuana use, and when I responded that I had none, it was rephrased questioningly as ganja, which must have been in response to my prominent Jamaican accent. The work of listening for the long haul captures some of these stories, stories of medical neglect, of non-existent safety nets, stories that would be lost in the now rapidly disappearing reams of research papers, charts and graphs, stories like the one I was lucky enough to listen to. And I'm going to have to ask Edisawa's forgiveness because I have mispronounced their name from the get-go, and I will probably continue to mispronounce it. I haven't been able to reach them to get corrected. Their story is a story of so many growing up with an invisible disability, a chronic illness mild enough to be dismissed as growing pains or laziness, a fate now shared by millions of children unknowingly afflicted with long COVID in a world that insists on denying their existence. It's one of the many ways we've failed to reckon with the wide scope of disability and the long shadow of ableism. Adesowa's story is one of Western success. She's studious. They're studious, hardworking. They came to the United States on a scholarship to continue their education when they were infected with COVID and subsequently developed long COVID. I would describe their condition as severe. Without family, without community, without roots, and little to nothing in the way of accommodations from their university, they've been forced into the position of working beyond their capacity in order to stay housed, stay enrolled, and maintain their status. I'm going to. The following is an excerpt from a longer quote from Adesowe, the rest of which is available on the Listening for the Long Haul website, which we're here to celebrate and will be available very soon. I'm going to quote it now. Quote, disability space or chronic illness space in the US, a lot is largely dominated by folks who have some sort of financial or material access. And so when I'm thinking about, the precarity of this condition and why it is terrifying, I'm thinking about people who are unhoused, right? I'm thinking of people, who are stateless. They need to survive in the interim while having to face excruciating, incalculable amounts of pain. And getting a house is just as important as getting a drug. Being able to know where they're going to eat and know that they don't have to push their body into PEM because they have no choice is just as important. And we were talking about, I'm actually going to go back and grab this up and give a little bit more context where they were said that they find a lot of long COVID ME spaces. There's a lot of emphasis on pushing money towards clinical trials and research and drugs. And I understand that, but it's important that we help people survive in the interim. So if we talk about breath, this is me now, back to me. We must talk about who has the room to breathe and who has the room to heal as much as possible, who has the room to rest. We know that Black and Brown populations were and are disproportionately impacted by acute COVID infections, but we don't see those same communities represented in long COVID spaces, movements, and research initiatives. Up until recently, the majority of research into myalgic encephalomyelitis, the condition that at least 50% of those with long COVID meet the diagnostic criteria for, was shown to have an average of 97% white participants over the course of 30 years. We are less likely to be diagnosed and have less access to symptom management, possible treatments, as well as the often extremely meager supports available. Long COVID, like ME, has been painted as a white upper middle class women's illness, which serves to minimize even as it disenfranchises. It does not take into consideration who survives long enough to be diagnosed, who can weather the storms, who has access, who has connections, and then conveniently lets misogyny do the rest of the work, painting those resourced enough for the long wait with the still loaded brush of hysteria. Meanwhile, marginalized communities with the luxury of time or money go undiagnosed, pushed farther to the sidelines, suffering silently in back rooms and unstable housing with inadequate access to health care or proper nutrition, which leads to inevitable decline and probable early death. It's weird. It's weird to be in a space like this and be so impacted by this illness. I consider myself to be severe. I am bedridden. I am housebound. I'm incapable of work. I have about 2 hours of usable energy a day. And as the years go by, as if you're in it, if you have long COVID, this is not a static illness. You don't get sick and stay sick. You get sick and then things go wrong all over your body in different ways, at different times. Um, and not to be morbid, but this is the thing that is going to kill me. It's not going to kill me today, but it is going to lead to an early death, along with the fact that I'm a poor person. I'm a poor person with lack of access. And that means that the newest, the latest, the best that we get out of all of these great pushes for funding and research is never going to trickle its way down to me. And I still keep fighting, even though I know that within my lifetime, none of those things are going to be available to me. It's really obvious that we fund research. It's really obvious that we educate our healthcare professionals. It's imperative that we participate On top of this, it's imperative that we participate in direct and or mutual aid to keep the least resourced of us alive in the interim, to do everything within our power to hold each other up. There is a special cruelty to the energy of energy limiting conditions, and decades of seemingly willful ignorance around post-viral illnesses. And that is true. Sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place. And while that is true, the story of neglect and dismissal of disability and chronic illness by our healthcare systems and society at large are not unique. To me, this emphasizes the importance of disability justice, a more holistic approach to the needs of a heterogeneous, very loosely affiliated community, of which the colloquially and newly named long COVID land is the newest microcosm. Again, there's no reason to expect equality or equity in a society that values neither, but it must be in all endeavors something to strive for. Disability justice aims to do that and should be embraced. It's difficult for folks newly disabled, newly chronically ill, often to identify as disabled, as it immediately puts you, as we know, on the outside of society. And I feel like we have to do everything we can to be as inclusive as possible at all times. I am one of the sort of extra questions on here was, do I have anything to say as far as a call for supporting folks? And that is my biggest calling is getting people to take whatever measures they can not to be infected or reinfected. The mitigations are imperative. Mask wearing is imperative. Um, Lobbying for clean air in hospitals and institutions like schools where children are being infected over and over and over again, as well as our teachers. So I don't know. Um, that I'm going to share a series of posters that I made, that I hope that I can do this properly, um, to sort of advance that. And of course, I'm in the wrong place. So I'll move this over here. And this is part of my COVID Can series. This one, of course, is about taking your breath away. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not very good at this. This is about the impacts that COVID can have on you. It's a series of posters with silhouetted images, of people surrounded by circles with different symptoms. So COVID can change your mind, could lead to a dark mood, poor memory, insomnia, stress, and anger. The breath one that I had up, we can suffer from COVID can take your breath and lead to chest pain, wheezing, shortness of breath, blood clots, coughing, which I think most people are familiar with. And here I am now unable to move this. So I'm very sorry for my lack of experience. COVID can get on your nerves, with tinnitus, chills, sweats, numb hands and feet, nerve pain, internal tremors. It can affect your skin with bruises, hives, broken skin, bloody nails. Um, Obviously, it can affect your digestive tract with heartburn, nausea, cramps, diarrhea, and constipation. And this is the all-in-one sort of most bang for your buck image that I made. I'll stop sharing now. Thank you for thank you for putting up with that. So those are posters that have been distributed all over North America and internationally in Puerto Rico to try and get people to know why it's important to mask up and to have good airflow, and also to maybe understand what it is that's going on with them, because we have so many people walking around that are sick. They got a mild COVID infection, and then 2, 3 weeks, maybe even months later, they suddenly have something going on with their heart or their blood pressure, and they're not making the connection. And so I'm trying to get people to see that there is a connection between their infection and these associated illnesses, and hopefully get people to do what they can to look out for each other. And I think I've stumbled into rambling territory, so I'm going to call it there. And thank everybody for putting this together. I appreciate all of you all.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Those posters were incredible.
Thank you.
Sure. In the interest of time, after we hear from our next two panelists, Maynard and Jackie, we're going to go straight into the Q&A community discussion so that we can end with enough time to give people about a 30-minute break before part two starts at 1:30. But now I want to welcome Maynard. We're so excited to hear from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maynard, a Filipino-American male, tan skin, shoulder-length black hair, brown eyes, wearing a gray collared shirt. Thank you for being here in the spirit of support and the willingness to learn. As discussed before, and apologies, but I will be reading what I planned and prepared to share with all of you today. As mentioned, I too live with my symptoms flaring up or worsening in circumstances like this, and I want to avoid as much embarrassment as possible. My experience with long COVID has been life-changing. It continues to challenge me as a disease and as a disability. As an Asian Filipino male, it has dismantled who I was and who I identified with for a majority of my life. As a male, the symptoms of chronic fatigue, post-exertional malaise, chronic pain, insomnia, brain fog, memory deficits, elevated heart rates at rest, headaches, anxiety, and depression continue to defeat me. All of the symptoms this disease has plagued me with these past 5 years has made me suffer in appearing and feeling helpless. As an Asian male, I often choose to suffer in silence because I don't want to have the labels of shame, weakness, or disabled. As a nurse, I have always been a patient advocate. Throughout my career, I supported my patients, helping them navigate and understand their illnesses, their treatment options, or the healthcare system. I was supportive in times of healing and provided comfort in times of sorrow. Suffering with long COVID, I now have become a self-advocate. If anyone can relate, nursing is a selfless vocation. As a long COVID sufferer, I have felt isolated, marginalized, disbelieved, and even ridiculed. Before long COVID, I was highly active, had multiple jobs, participated in multiple organizations, ran half marathons, competed in high intensity athletic challenges, and was the embodiment of the social butterfly. I am none of that now. I live day to day, not in a carpe diem lifestyle, but a lifestyle of sua periculo, choosing to do things at my own risk, and having to always consider the consequences. Can I afford to crash out, literally, and not just for a few hours, but for days or weeks? I have had to completely overhaul who I was. I now schedule times to be social and active, make plans, prepare myself to have the energy for those events, have courage to often cancel those plans, or to accept being on medications that allow me to even be present, that I know have adverse side effects and will have long-term consequences as I continue to choose to take those medications. Long COVID has stripped me of my nature, my identity, my vocation, and my life. My participation in the Living for the Long Haul Oral History Project has reassured me that I am not alone in this suffering. all those who participated in the project, all of you present on this webinar, validate our suffering. Now that my life has flipped, I am more aware that ableism exists, politics and public health exists, that forums and opportunities for education, awareness, understanding, and compassion, like this oral history project, are important, especially during these times. We must always live and breathe for justice, not just for the moment, but throughout our life, for our future and the future of those who come after us. Fortunately, I no longer experience the physical manifestations of being short of breath. I do continue to be exhausted, as some of you can relate to. Exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, as I feel 5 years has gone by in a blink, and I have lived less than half of it. I have since adapted and accepted this new life. It did take a while. My life is now what I call the 5 Ps: prioritizing, planning, preparing, pacing, and knowing that I will be paying the consequences. There is an aspect I shared in my personal account of the Oral History Project. It's a side we often overlook in living a life of chronic illness and disability. That is the financial and economic impacts of long COVID. Healthcare and medical debt is real. Unemployment and disability is real. I share this as I personally have exhausted my long-term disability benefits, drained my savings, withdrawn my retirement, and continue to be on the perilous cycle of denials for Social Security disability over these past 5 years. As a healthcare professional and a person who understands the science, research, as well as the pros and cons of existing therapies, I had hoped to discover a cure for myself. I have tried numerous therapies, treatments, and medications over the past 5 years in hopes that something would heal me. I have tried therapies from the West to the East and have even traveled abroad seeking a cure. Before anyone speculates on my endeavors, I did not want to accept being disabled, nor have ever thought I would become disabled in this life, considering everything I did to prevent something like this ever happening to me. I tried returning to work in my career with very few accommodations for a year, pushing myself day after day just to exist in doing my job. It was a perilous existence and one that I considered ending myself so as not to suffer anymore. Even during my early illness with COVID, I did my best to avoid hospitalization and even accepted dying at home over the cost of being hospitalized. The cost of healthcare, especially living with chronic illness, is devastating. I shamefully admit to being in financial ruin and don't look forward to living a life of retirement, considering I just live day to day anyways. Yet I am here, speaking to all of you today, taking my breath for justice, sharing my story in support of you listening who may be pacing through life on the same journey. To everyone here and everyone who will hear our stories in the future, thank you for breathing with us as we all share the same air.
Thank you so much, Maynard. Beautiful words. We'd like to now welcome Jackie and to hear about her story.
Thank you, Kamara. Just checking, are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, great, great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am Jackie Luciano, and wow, I just want to express how honored I am to have all of our Part 1 presenters here today. What amazing and powerful stories we have heard. A big thank you as well to our participants and our audience for joining us live and sharing your time and energy. I appreciate all of you. Now, my first slide here is titled Breathing for Justice, with my name at the bottom and today's date of April 23rd, 2025. Please note that the link to my transcript and slides are available to all, Most include big black words with a light beige background with a teal outline that I will read. And all hyperlinks are in blue with QR codes included that say scan me at the bottom. And full disclosure, I didn't have the energy to proofread or run this by my close friends for my presentation. So everyone, I appreciate your patience. And if I say anything incorrectly, please feel free to correct me. And today I'd like to take a moment to check in with every person here. How's your breathing today and right now? If able and willing, please type your response in the Q&A and we'll have more discussions about it. One of the central themes we learned, and as you heard today from listening for the long haul, is how long COVID has affected the way we breathe. But before I delve into that, allow me first to share my long COVID journey next on slide 2. Now, in 2020, do you remember where you were when the world shut down in March 2020? 5 years ago, we were living through chaos, widespread COVID-19 infections, confusion, deaths, and even shortages of essentials like toilet paper. Frontline and essential workers were left unprotected. I had to wear garbage bags and reuse baggy surgical masks while COVID spread like wildfire through nursing homes. I was working as a nurse consultant, feeling a strong calling to help, even though I wanted to be home with my family. So I adjusted my corporate role to support staff and residents during the lockdown, all while navigating confusing, contradictory public health guidelines and conflicting messages daily. In April 2020, I was exposed to COVID and isolated due to COVID-like symptoms. Note that long COVID is a patient-coined term that emerged in 2020 before the rollout of COVID vaccines, when many people weren't recovering and many of us on the front lines weren't told about this. As a nurse, I was mandated to get vaccinated and I received 3 doses. I'm also vaccine injured. It's important to understand that long COVID and vaccine injury are not the same. Both realities exist and can coexist. Sharing my truth about being vaccine injured does not mean I'm anti-vaccine. It means I'm advocating for honesty and treatments. Now, December 2021, a month after my booster, I had my first COVID-19 nasal test. It turned out positive, and I haven't been the same since. Since 2022, I've racked up thousands in debt, just like Maynard and many that you heard today, chasing treatments, only to find harmful advice and that insurance rarely covers the actual few interventions that actually provide temporary relief. I'd like to shout out to my handful of practitioners who dare to think differently and have supported me along the way. For years, long COVID and its chronic effects weren't even mentioned. That silence was a failure then, and it still is today. I lost my job and most of my ability to function, to regularly care for myself, hence why I can't have my camera on, and working on the front lines. And as a former public health nurse, I have since realized the lies we've been told, the lack of public health messaging, that pandemics are mass disabling events, and that most COVID cases are allegedly, quote, mild. Are our stories that you've heard so far today mild to you? That in 2023, and this is a low statistics, by the way, according to a Nature article, $218 billion is the projected economic loss in earnings for working-aged adults due to long COVID. We are not exaggerating. Long COVID involves profound loss and severe financial hardships, and all of us here and everyone around the world deserve justice. In 2024, long COVID cases continue to rise, yet governments continue to ignore and erase us. There's no financial support, there's no urgency, there are no FDA-approved treatments, there's not even biomarkers. Long COVID is a global public health emergency, but instead of action, funding cuts are implemented, and even long COVID was erased on covid.gov last week. Where's the Operation Warp Speed for long COVID and for the growing number of people developing new or worsening disabilities? I recently had major surgery in December, and most of the staff caring for me didn't know about long COVID or my complex chronic conditions. I'm deeply grateful to Denise at ME Action, who gave me resources to bring to my pre-surgical appointments, and especially to my anesthesiologist to prevent me from worsening. But why is it up to the chronically ill communities and advocacy organizations to educate and protect patients? Where's our public health and medical institutions? Who are our allies? What about the select few practitioners trying to actually help? Where's their support? And why are frontline healthcare workers still so underinformed and underprepared with no updated training or policies and procedures in place? It's 2025. Can you imagine being hospitalized or undergoing surgery only to be dismissed, disbelieved, or even threatened with a psychiatric transfer without addressing the root cause? That happened to me during an ER visit, and there's more similar stories. This is what it means to navigate healthcare as a chronically ill, disabled patient living with long COVID and associated conditions. Many can't even access care or leave their homes or beds. Long COVID affects us all. It shouldn't be politicized, and we must fight and be part of this long COVID revolution. Now, back to our theme here on slide 3. What is one thing we all have in common? Yes, we all have breath in common. We all need to breathe to stay alive. Many of us long haulers have difficulty breathing or experience breathlessness. These next 4 slides are quotes from long haulers. As my colleague and I were interviewing Maynard Sassis, registered nurse, for Listening for the Long Haul, we were deeply moved by his quote. And here's a quote from his oral history. I was telling myself that unless I need to be intubated, I'd rather just die at home because it's not necessary to go into the hospital and end up with financial fallout for being treated. For me, the acute phase was difficult because most of the major symptoms, like the loss of taste and smell, fatigue, myalgia, cough, and shortness of breath, were present. I had shortness of breath, but not to the point where I felt I needed to be intubated or required oxygen therapy. I only noticed it if I overexerted myself. I limited my activity at home. End quote. Wow, this is one of our first inspirations for Breathing for Justice. Death against debt? A frontliner who risked his life as a nurse? Maynard's quote in part reflects a broken system where medical care is so unaffordable in the United States. Survival should not be contingent on what someone can afford, yet this is our reality. Like Maynard, millions of us long haulers have lost our jobs. I am currently unemployable, and I received my second denial for Social Security disability, a system that I paid into but cannot access. Slide 5 reads another quote. God, I can barely breathe, which is another quote by a long hauler, Nick Bravo. On the right here is a QR code to his inspiring TEDx talk and music on YouTube. I highly recommend checking his video out. And on slide 6, quotes a Michigan WXYZ news article where long COVID patients used art to show struggle with lingering symptoms. Dr. Santa Rosa said, respiratory problems are a huge kind of factor that's still persistent in long COVID. And in the artwork, you'll see that often represented in the lungs. And they've drawn flames, or some are like bound. It looks like they are bound by barbed wire, or there's like a thorny rose that's almost wrapped around one. Scan this QR code to watch or read the article to learn more about the artwork. And again, all my links will be accessible and made available. For several months, and still 3 years later, I often say here on slide 7, I can't breathe. So many of the millions missing, those also living with ME/CFS, known as myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, is a devastating, complex, chronic disease with disabling symptoms that doesn't improve with rest and often worsens with activity. It's hell, and many experience similar dysfunctional breathing. I often feel guilty for saying, I can't breathe. That phrase reminds me of George Floyd and when I stood alongside my Black colleagues on the front lines in 2020, witnessing the death of George Floyd and the protests for justice for Black Lives Matter. I can't breathe echoes across several painful realities, just like you heard today with Shamir and Tracy and everyone today. For those with long COVID and MECFS, and for those suffocated and marginalized by systems of racial injustice and oppression, it's become a call to breathe, not just for survival, but for justice, for cross-racial and social solidarity. Slide 8 shows a quote from Dr. Poon's book titled Asian American is Not a Color, page 157. Developing and practicing solidarity required an understanding of the notion that until we are all safe, until we all have justice, until that happens, none of us do. There's a QR code here that links to the book as well. And slide 9 reads another quote on page 165. There is power in knowing history and ourselves and recognizing that our collective communities are capable of transforming institutions, communities, and the power arrangements in the world. That is why we are here today. We are stronger together as we breathe for justice. I thank UIC's Recover Study, who introduced me to Dr. Janet Lin and historian Dr. Jenny Breyer. I've come to understand the deep value of oral and public history. I'm especially looking forward to Jenny's presentation and to hearing from all our amazing afternoon panelists later today. And thanks to listening for the long haul, I had the opportunity to share my story, something my children can return to one day when they are old enough to begin understanding what happened to me, their mom, and their grandma. My children shouldn't have to experience the same trauma, silence, and confusion I did. I was just 10 years old when my immigrant mother was misdiagnosed and disabled. I later became a nurse determined to figure out what happened to her. But even then, I never truly learned what she was going through or why I too had been chronically ill for most of my life. Instead, I followed the systems that neglected to fund and study MECFS, plus infection and exposure-related chronic conditions. They psychologized and harmed my mom. I didn't know what to do about the lies until this pandemic, until I became disabled in my late 30s, after developing long COVID and associated conditions, that I finally began to speak up about the isms, such as ableism, racism, and sexism. No one should have to endure decades of dismissal, misdiagnoses, or neglect. Yet here we are. Slide 10 here has the QR code to the apology letter and poem I wrote to my mother, who is also one of the hashtag Millions Missing. This was written for the Color of Long COVID series with the Sick Times and Alice Wong's Disability Visibility Project. Are you interested in an art and poetry night show? Let us know in the Q&A. I used to love watching Deaf Poetry Jam. Now, the way we breathe clearly impacts our health. Slide 11 here lists the Sick Times article. Don't just breathe clean air, breathe it well, because it's true. Everyone breathes, but how well are we breathing? Whether or not you've had COVID-19, improving your breathing can help, but always listen to your body and do what's right for you. I had to relearn how to breathe again after my infection. And even now, some breath work can still trigger a crash and relapse. Another long hauler, who is also a massage therapist, recently introduced me to nasal breathing by Patrick McKeon and Dr. Buteyko. Now, have you found anything that helps your breathing? Please feel free to share. The tricolored long COVID ribbon seen here in slide 12 was created by long haulers that symbolizes our truth. Gray for loss and grief, teal for hope and support, and black for loneliness and isolation. Join our disability justice community as we must act now, Long COVID can affect anyone, anywhere, anytime, even after multiple reinfections. This slide 13 lists how we need urgent funding, legislation, and updated clinical care. There's so much existing research being blocked and ignored. We need stronger education, awareness, social support, global collaboration, community solidarity, and a movement rooted in disability and social justice. Why can't Social Security or a dedicated agency right now help us safely recover and return to the workforce? I've been too sick to join studies, yet denied disability because I'm supposedly able to work full time. Even working on this event has caused me to relapse with worsening daily symptoms, yet I'm still been denied. So many do not have income, health insurance, or shelter due to long COVID. Make it make sense. Don't let anyone silence or gaslight you. If you've ever had COVID, connect the dots to any new symptoms. And please don't forget the children and elders suffering in silence too. To my former colleagues in public health and long-term care, I see you. Thank you for your support today. I urge you to please reevaluate your long COVID policies, if you even have any. If not, start one. Update your post-infection assessments, monitoring, and care plans. We all have something to contribute. Ms. Jones from the Midwest AIDS Training and Education Center reminded me that the success of HIV/AIDS funding and recognition was always rooted in advocacy. So I share this with all of you. Stay rooted in advocacy and justice to support yourself, to support us, because we, the people, do have the power. Social movements are how we create change together. With that said, slide 14 here. Join our ally, ME Action, who is igniting a global revolution in ME and long COVID care. On May 12th, as the Millions Missing 2025 are sending out an SOS to save our support systems, save our science, and save our society. Join the protest in Washington, D.C. Host your own hashtag Millions Missing protest or gathering, and show up on social media on May 12th. Learn more at meaction.net and by scanning this QR code. Now, let's take this moment we have now as we collectively make history. Let's breathe for justice. In solidarity, with love and gratitude, thank you. Slide 16 includes a list of resources discussed during the entire presentation, all in one slide that will be made available. And lastly, let's connect on Instagram and Blue Sky at Breathing for Justice, 4 as in the number, not spelled out, or email us at breathingforjustice@gmail.com. Thank you again to our sponsors, Illinois Humanities and the American Association of People with Disabilities. And thank you to UIC's Dr. Jennifer Breyer, Kamara, and Emmy, Vula, Brunum, and team at Listening for the Long Haul and Strategies for High Impact Long COVID Justice. Thank you to Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL access and NS Captioning for providing live captions. Thank you, Beth, for being here today. And now we can go straight to the Q&A session. Thank you to everyone for your patience and understanding.
And another thank you, Jackie, as well. Like she said, we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A session, so we can still end with enough time for folks to have about a 30-minute break for those planning to return for part 2 this afternoon. We have the Q&A chat open for those who would like to ask questions or share thoughts and with our panelists. Or if panelists wish to ask each other questions, that's also encouraged. There are a few questions in the chat. Let's see. There was a question in the chat about if folks have any thoughts on children or family and caregiving in the context of long COVID and associated illnesses in relation to COVID. And that's for the panelists, if anyone would like to share. Oh, here we have the question. Will anyone be addressing the links between neurodivergence, trans, queer, and higher incidence of long COVID? We have a few. Oh, Gabriel?
I mean, I could just say that there is a higher incidence of long COVID among trans people and neurodivergent people. The reasons are unclear, but likely has to do with the structural determinants of health and experiencing more marginalization and trauma, um, in addition to um, unstable or more difficult conditions of work and the inability to rest, etc. So communities that are harder hit by chronic illness tend to have higher rates of long COVID.
Tracy? Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with what Gabrielle said completely, but I also think that there's a component of if you are already marginalized, you are probably more likely to be open about the difficulties that you're having as far as like long COVID or health struggles that say someone who is living a more mainstream life might feel like they need to like hide from their friends and family. So I feel like as a group, like if you're already living on the margins, it's more likely that you're going to speak up and say, hey, this is not right. This is not right. What's going on with me? This is not what's right. What's going on with my community, as opposed to people walking around being like, oh, it's just allergies. I'm fine. I've never had COVID. I'm not sick. And sort of playing along that middle line. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. I see it.
Can I add something also?
Yes, please.
There has been some written about this, about the link for trans and queer folks. Specifically so I don't know if at this point if they're still collecting them, but the CDC and the Census Bureau linked with the CDC has been collecting data for like the past 3 or so years or a little bit more um, on who gets long COVID, right? And so it's a survey that they do, which in my mind, the survey is like a huge undercount because the survey is done. It's an internet survey, so you have to have reliable internet, which for example, like this is from the reporting that I did for that story for Palabra. Latinos, for example, have like much lower rates of having reliable broadband access, but also specifically trans and bi folks always have the highest rates, like when you're looking at sexuality and gender, have the highest rates of long COVID. So I agree with I agree with what both Tracy and Gaudez said, that, social determinants of health, people being like less intent on playing along with what's normal or being more open about the struggles that they deal with. Lack of access to healthcare is a really important one for that, at least for queer and trans folks that the situation currently is just beyond description of how seriously bad it is. But this has, obviously been the case for some time, that queer and trans folks have had less access to um, respectful, quality, reliable healthcare. About neurodivergence. Sorry, I just wanted to say also that I'll put the link in the chat, but there was a piece written by Miles Griffiths, who's one of the editors of the Sick Times. He actually wrote it for Them, which is a news outlet specifically for queer issues, about the link. I think it was both for trans and queer folks, specifically looking at that trans bi link that's from the census/CDC data. But also for neurodivergence, that's really complicated. There are some things, like, I believe, and I filed this away in my memory because it's something that I'm particularly interested in as a trauma survivor and as a journalist who has interviewed a lot of people with long COVID. I would say, like, the majority of whom in their interviews tell me that they are also trauma survivors. So there's, for example, in my like mental warehouse of information that I don't know the link to, I'm almost certain that there is a link between being a trauma survivor, for example, and developing ME/CFS. And so when you're looking at trauma, there have been, for example, let's use ADHD. There are a lot of reasons why ADHD manifests. Some of them are genetic, some of them are environmental, but some of them also are related to trauma. I would suggest Gabor Mate's work. Gabor is the first name, and Mate, thank you, Emmy, is the last name. His work on trauma and health in general, but specifically trauma and mental health. So even though, what the person asked was specifically about neurodivergence and long COVID, I do think that the trauma link is really important there, because I think neurodivergent people, I haven't looked for stats on this, but I would bet you anything that neurodivergent people also have higher rates of trauma, because if you look at different kinds of neurodivergence, it's harder for us to get care. For our neurodivergence, people may experience trauma because of their neurodivergence. People with neurodivergence, like my types of neurodivergence, are caused by trauma, both genetic and trauma that I experienced. And so I do think that there's a link there. And I put this in the chat, that this is something that I really hope that there's research on, because I think that it will shed a lot of light on beyond just, race, gender, sexuality, like your working environment. I think that other aspects of people's body minds will in the future show up to be related to long COVID. Sorry, there's just one other aspect. I believe, I could be wrong on this, it's either ME/CFS or long COVID or both, that, for example, depression, having pre-existing depression or anxiety increases your likelihood of developing them. I'm pretty sure it's long COVID, but in my mind, anxiety and depression, especially if they're long-standing, are also types of neurodivergence. So clearly, our minds and bodies are very connected. Like, if you look at how many neuroreceptors there are in the gut, for example. Like there's just not a real disconnect between them. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but these are things that I hope will be elucidated in the future with more research. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. We have a few more questions in the chat. So I believe the panelists can see them. If there's any question that you're drawn to, please feel free to come off mute. I'll ask another. Someone's asked, I've been struggling with pacing and feeling like an actual human since I got long COVID in 2022. Are there any suggestions on how to handle pacing? And relatedly, how or did any of the listening for long haul influence how the panelists viewed theirs or their own experiences with long COVID?
Can I just really quickly answer the pacing?
Yes, please.
This is not probably what you want to hear, questioner, but I think the issue is that you have to rest more than you think you do. And I'm guilty of not doing this, but I think all of us probably could rest even more. And especially when you're talking about pacing, it's so hard because, you know, living a normal life, or I can't remember exactly what the wording was. To be totally honest, I feel like those of us with long COVID and other, you know, MECFS and other illnesses that are energy depleting, part of it is that we have to accept that our bodies are not quote unquote normal, and that is okay, and that we have to live with our bodies, and so we have to treat them well. This is not a lecture, like this is more just probably a reminder to myself and a reminder to everybody else that rest. Something that I have found to be really helpful is the concept of radical rest. So it's like what I'm talking about, resting even more than you think you should, the priority of rest over everything else. Sorry, questioner, I'm not sure exactly what your question was, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that it's something that probably all of us can always remember a bit more.
Of course, and we have some commenters and some panelists and other participants sharing info in the Q&A chat as well. We have time enough for probably one more question. Let's see. Someone's asked, any thoughts on why long COVID was removed from the CDC website, or what biomarkers could be used to diagnose long COVID, as well as any resources for connecting people with long COVID to the kind of economic support or community support that our panelists have been talking about.
This is Shamir speaking. I wanted to answer that question and tell the person who asked about pacing that I did comment on their question, and I hope that they find the comment useful and helpful in some ways. I think, to be frank, the CDC erased COVID information because that is the rule of the day when it comes to sadly U.S. government. It seems like those of us who are the most marginalized, the most excluded, the most left out, um, even as it relates to health conditions, and also being very honest and transparent about these chronically health conditions that are also disabling. The government no longer sees the benefit or the capital in keeping people abreast about what's happening. So I think that's what's happening. Um, Sadly, we've seen and heard some of the most atrocious and triggering things lately from the Secretary of Health and Human Services about autism and other forms of neurodivergence and chronic conditions. And with that, there also have been striking cuts to the NIH and other communities and other organizations and federal agencies who are responsible for making sure that the public health in those in its communities are safe and have more than enough knowledge. So that's the scary part about this, is that people, they think that erasure means that it's not happening, and the saddest part is that it is happening. So I would highly suggest that if possible, you continue to do your own research. Find community within the long COVID community, people who are willing to be inclusive, compassionate, and empathetic, and learn as much as you can. But there are still really great resources and people who, after 5 years, are willing to give you the 101 of what's happening with long COVID. But it's very unfortunate. And I worry for each and every one of us, especially our children in schools and all kinds of stuff, about what happens when we avoid and erase pertinent information.
Thank you, Shamir. And with that, I'll go ahead and we'll wrap up part one of today's Breathing for Justice webinar. We've been sharing thank yous around all day, and we're going to continue to do so. But thank you to everyone here for your patience and participation today. Thank you to Sarah and Jackie for bringing us together to learn and breathe. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing your varied and distinct, intimate and personal experiences with chronic illness and disability, in grief and in hope, as well as what's worked for you in reckoning with the lasting impacts of a global pandemic amidst overlapping systems of economic, political, and social oppression, racial injustice, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, and ableism. Breathing for Justice and Listening for the Long Haul, we hope encourages us all. We believe encourages us all to leave the evidence of our lives as we are living them today, and to embrace the healing potentials found in listening deeply to, for, and with each other. And finally, we invite everyone to return after I think we still have about 45-minute break for part two, starting at 1:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, when we will hear from Dr. Jenny Breyer, Morgan Davies, and Dr. Ileana Pagan Titelbaum on the impact of long COVID on communities of color, disability justice, and how education and oral history can inform policies for pandemics and mass disabling events. So thank you all again. Hope to see you at 1:30.